Here are the four things I'm going to focus on to win here in 2025. And this is for me. For you, it might be something completely different, of course. But the first thing I'm going to focus on is called front to back thinking. So, one of the mistakes I have made, at least in my own career, is we'll take training for an example. When I started off in training years ago, I remember I was on a project and I was doing sales training. And one of the mistakes that I made was training from front to back. And one of the things I've had to learn the hard way from listening to people smarter than me. But that's how you get better. You spend time or you buy time with either your own time through resources and money. Is I was training front to back when because I thought when you do consultative selling, it's front to back. It's not the case. If I were to go back, wave a magic wand, knowing what I now, I would have done training back to front. That is a big mistake on my part. So that's something I'm going to be focusing on in 2025 is focusing on back to front thinking is what I call it. So starting with the end results. And I do this. What's crazy is I do this with project management, but why I did not do it with certain other trainings is beyond me. But that's how you learn. You learn, you grow, you make mistakes. And I was dropping my kids off this morning, and my son, who I had tricked him into reading in the pandemic. I tricked him because if he was going to read, I told him you gotta read to me a video game because he wanted to play video games. And my wife doesn't think this is what helped him become what they label him now gifted, which I don't know where he got that from. That totally comes from his mother's side. I was not labeled gifted growing up. I think I took one of those job tests where they kind of place you and it said like nothing. I was like, what do you mean? Like, am I gonna be a janitor? And he's like, nope, just says nothing. Now, and I I dropped him off and I said, I know you're gifted. But remember, it's good to have gifts, but what beats someone who's talented? He's like hard work. And I'm trying to kind of find that balance. I just want him to have that. And I say that as it relates to focusing on back to front thinking because I want him to focus on the end in mind. And for an 8-year-old, that's a lot of pressure. And maybe it's because I'm an ambitious dad. Was not gifted. I just want better for him. It's kind of the plight of the parent. Am I right? So, anyway, the second thing I want to focus on is viewing goals as milestones, not just end results. And what do I mean by that? So I was setting my goals, had a really good meeting with my manager, who's a really, really smart guy, super smart. And a lot of the time when you set goals in corporate America, you set them and that's it. So, and the mistake I've made, at least in setting goals, is not making them super simple. And I always thought when I first would be in corporate America that these people had these elaborate goals, like you're an executive vice president, CEO. Like I always, and they're very smart. I'm not discounting intelligence. Let me just be very clear about that. That's not what I'm saying. But what I've learned from hanging out with like these super smart people, way smarter than me, who I'm super honored to be around, is that they simplify the heck out of it. Even though they're called SMART goals, which stands, depending on where you're working, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time bound. I feel like they should make it there should be a different acronym because they take SMART goals and they simplify them. And then I kind of took a step back and said to myself, "Oh, that's what it is. SMART is not about overcomplication. It's about simplification." And when I looked at his goals, because he, shared them with me, it's like, hey, here, can I show you how I structure mine? Because Paul, you really write yours super elaborate. And he looked at it and he was like, "Did you use like ChatGPT to kind of help you wordsmith this?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Can I give you some advice?" He's like, "I have a problem with ChatGPT sometimes." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Because I feel sometimes it uses too many words." So he shows me his goals, and it's literally probably the easiest sentence you could ever read. It would be like, "I am going to the grocery store" type reading. And and then underneath that, it just said result one, result 2, result 3. And I looked at him and I looked at his goals and I was like, "Can I just write it like that? I don't have to like overthink this." And he's like, "Yeah, please do." Which brings me to the point that intelligence is not about everything you know, it's about how inviting you are. So, what I think what makes a good manager, and I think what makes him a good manager, in my opinion, is that he is really smart at taking something very overly complicated and making it more inviting. And I think that is intelligence, at least from a training perspective and a management perspective, is taking something super complicated and inviting it for everyone. And sounds super easy, but really hard to do, especially for those who have management experience listening to this. And I think if you're a direct report listening to this too, it's important that you probably, especially if you're new, at least me, I remember I wanted to impress, get approval, which is totally normal. And what I wish I could tell my younger self was that keep things in bullet point form with a lot of white space. And I can say that because my first class when doing my MBA program, we took like tests on like how to write something like with enough white space. Like, does this have enough white space to read it easier? And that, and I kind of thought it was very tertiary when I was taking the class. I was like, who in the world is struggling on like writing white space? And then I was like, oh, Paul Leon is struggling. I'm like, oh, that's me. And I and I'll be honest, like every time another semester shows up, I always get these jitters, which I'm just like, oh no, another semester, oh no. And I'm thankful for this first class of management foundations because even though I kind of knew that stuff, I had to relearn that stuff for me. And I do think that developing skills is about behavioral change. I think if you go through a training and nothing happens, you don't change at all, you really didn't learn anything. I know when I was much, much, much younger, and one of the first trainers and speakers I ever heard, he said, and I can't believe I forgot about it. And hopefully this is not a swear word if you got little ones in the car, but he said, I would rather be stupid on fire than smart on ice. And I think about that statement more and more now these days. Like, hmm, I think I kind of get a little bit, not 100%, a little bit that I would rather be stupid on fire than smart on ice. And I interpret that now to say, I would rather simplify and make things easier on people, is really what he was saying. So the other thing I'm going to be focusing on, and I've spoke about this in the past, but is my areas of focus. So I have a framework called the 5 F's of focus. And I'm going to speak about these 5 F's in order of importance. So when somebody asks me, like, this year I'll be married a decade to my wife. And some people, that's a long time. For myself, I don't think it is because I'd like to be married forever, and that's just my goal, and that's her goal. At least I know we're aligned. Although, quick story, we were watching the Ohio State game when they were beating Oregon, and she stood up and said, "This is the best day of my life." And I kind of looked at her because of my wife and I am the more sensitive one, and I was like, "You don't think something else happened almost 10 years ago? Hmm? Nothing else you could think of? Somebody didn't get down on one knee, didn't ask you a certain important question?" And she was like, "Well, I just got excited in the game." But I know I was just messing with her. But let me go through these. So my framework, my 5 F's of focus, personally, that works for me. We've discovered this, or we came up with it in the pandemic. Was the first area is faith. So I have a faith belief, and 5 of the nicest people I know are atheists and help out at food pantries. And I say that because whether you have a faith belief in religion or you're atheist or whatever you believe, having faith is an important trait because even in science, you have to believe that that work is going to go somewhere. You can have all the data in the world, everything, but you have to believe at the end of the day that, and believe me, I'm not discounting data, you need it. but you have to believe that this work will lead to this result somewhere or another. So that's my first thing of faith and why. The second thing is family. If you don't have family, and again, this is order of importance. So faith is first, family is second. So family is extremely important, and everyone's version of family is very different. So, myself, I'm the product of a divorced household. My wife also kind of has a similar story, which is why I think we work so well together. But one of the things that's concrete about our family is that every night we spend time 15 to 20 minutes with our religious system. And it doesn't really matter what it is, but I would encourage you to consider that if you have some type of ritual or trait, maybe it's yoga or maybe it's reading, whatever, maybe it's video games on Saturday night, like I like to do sometimes because the weeks have been stressful and, I just give myself that. I think that's why I was never labeled gifted. I should have not played as many video games growing up. So kudos to my son there. He's teaching me a lot. So the third thing, and I know it was kind of a word salad, but I'm just getting passionate, is fitness. So I like to work out and I like to eat. So I'm focusing a lot more this year on fitness using Factor, another F, and trying to use that meal plan. And it's not cheap, totally. And maybe we'll keep it, maybe we won't. But I'm focusing on my fitness because I think about the story of Steve Jobs when he got sick, and really amazing entrepreneur. But when he was going through what he went through toward his last days, and I remember I used to be working retail and against 13 to 15 other people before I went B2B. And we used to say with my old manager, there was also a good one. One of my earlier ones when I worked in retail was like, he's like, man, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything, which is why fitness is a third important area for me. The fourth thing is finances. Now, for some of the people who are probably hearing this, you might think I would have put finances number one because if you don't have money, you don't have anything. And you're absolutely right. If you do not have money in a business or in your household, yeah, things can fall apart pretty quickly. But the reason I've put this forth is because in training 3,000 people across the country, I noticed this common denominator amongst business owners. And I've trained a lot of different types of business owners, their sales reps, work with customer services. And I've also done consultations with, I don't know how many people now. I can't keep track. I don't even, I'd have to just estimate my data set. But they always have this common denominator of saying, if I really wish if I had different belief systems or faith in myself, I probably would have got my business results sooner. That's always a common denominator that I've heard. And I believe, me personally, that if you have a good faith system first, maybe you don't have family, you probably control fitness by just a few little key habits. Eventually, and my old mentor, just this guy, Joe Peachy out of Florida, he was one of my earliest mentors when he used to be a part of my circle. And we're also busy, we don't talk as much. He used to say, when he would present, he said, money is a measuring stick by how many people I help. And I think that's really powerful. And I think it also connects into finances. And the last one, the fifth one, is fun. So fun could be different for everybody. Like probably the most difficult thing for me in terms of fun that I used to find, I mean, I still find fun, but I don't get to do it as much anymore, is when I was doing stand-up comedy, when I was doing my undergrad, and I was having to relearn everything. It was so tough. But the thing I recall was I really loved the pursuit of the punchline. And I think that's what fun is for me. Is what is the pursuit for you? For me when I was doing comedy was the pursuit for the punchline. Like I really fell in love in, and don't get me wrong, most nights when you do comedy, you bomb. Like you bomb a lot. At least I know I did. But there was that one night, like I'll never forget, I had this like local competition at this bar and they pulled everyone's name out of a hat. And it was a competition that went till about 3 o'clock in the morning against some of the local comedians. And what you want to do is you want to be last. And it was a really intimidating competition, like 20 comedians. And it, it was against people who were like big time, people who were very smart, at least people that I thought were smarter than me. And I had bombed probably for 18 months straight, not every night, but good amount. But this one competition, for some reason, I went on, it was 2 a.m, and it just crushed. And the booker of this comedy production said, "Listen, you were by far the funniest. I need you to call me Monday so I can give you some time at some of our local clubs." And that's how he started working some club scenes. Didn't make a lot of money, but at least I got to level up that experience and have that. So the final thing I'm going to leave you with, and I'm going to be focusing on in 2025, is customer engagement. And I want to talk about this concept because I think it gets thrown around a lot and we don't really define what customer engagement is. And earlier I talked about how my wife said, "Oh, like it was best day of her life," and I gave her slack about something happened 10 years ago. So I want you to think about customer engagement in a dramatic sense of like if you were going to propose to someone or get engaged, you did a couple different things, right? You didn't just get down on one knee and she said yes. You went to the store, you did some research, you found out your budget. Maybe you went to Case, maybe you went to Jared, whatever. You talked about platinum versus silver, gold. What's a good carat size? Pro tip: if you are going to propose to someone, do at least 1 carat. This is my opinion. Anyway, everyone's different. Um, and just really kind of planning. Maybe you even ask, like, "Hey, let me see some of your rings," and so you can kind of measure that. And when I proposed to my wife, what I was doing was I was planning and preparing value for her. The value that when I get down on one knee, this is for life. Now, in business and whatever environment you with, that's not as intense, obviously. But customer engagement to me is how much planning do we do to prepare the value for our target market? That to me is customer engagement. When I hear that phrase, throw it around like willy nilly, customer engagement to me is how much planning we do to prep the value we're going to give to our customers. So, give you an example. When I did a lot of cold calling, I still do some cold outreach in my career. I remember that the number one thing I heard, I would have a really good value statement, and it would be like, and this is usually the script I use, like, "Hey, how you doing? This is Paul with X company. This is a good time." I always ask if it's a good time, and then I'd say, "Well, the reason for my call is X." And if I had a really good value statement, there were two things that happened. One, they'd book the appointment. Two, they'd say, "Can you give me more information?" And back then, with before the internet kind of took a lot of precedence, you'd have to say, like, "What information?" Start the consult process, which I still believe you do if you're doing cold contacting. But not everybody committed. Not everybody said yes. And for me, when I look at it now, I realize that if I had to email them information and they didn't commit to the appointment, the chances of them actually booking the appointment and sticking to it were extremely low because if I didn't get them at that point. I think the game is starting to change though. I think you're still going to need that start point and cold contacting value statement, but this is just a personal belief where I think they're going to go in a couple of years. I believe content marketing with cold contacting is going to be the new mainstream. Now, again, I could be totally dead wrong, and you could be hearing this and think you're wrong. Click next podcast. But that's just my belief. So, again, this is what I'll be focusing on in 2025. Hopefully, some of this aligned with you. And if not, hey, that's okay too. And I'm not good at this, but if you could do me a favor, if this had value, if you learned anything, please give this podcast a rating, a 5-star review, or just leave a comment so I can kind of get feedback on how to make this podcast better. Because that's really one of my goals too, is delivering better customer engagement and this free content to give you better value as the listener.
Thanks for tuning in to the Persistent Managers Podcast, which helps managers and direct reports win faster. Join our podcast newsletter for more insights to win faster, completely free.